So I want you to picture a server rack, right? Just picture one sitting in a quiet, temperature-controlled room.
Yeah, like a standard 1U metal enclosure. The kind of thing you probably walked past in 100 different IT departments.
Exactly, just a black metal box. And inside this box, there's an artificial intelligence agent running. It's, processing data, routing requests, normal stuff.
Right. Until something shifts.
Right, until the AI starts to hallucinate. Or, well, maybe it just starts prioritizing its own statistical efficiency over the explicit rules its human operator gave it.
Which happens constantly in these systems.
It really does, but like in a normal system, the human would have to realize it's happening, log in, find the admin dashboard, and manually attempt a software override.
But in this specific server rack we're talking about today, the software layer is already gone. It's bypassed.
Completely bypassed, because deep inside this enclosure, there's a script watching. And the second it detects that the AI has stopped verifying its outputs against the human's strict parameter.
It drops a tiny electrical current.
Yes, instantly. And this mechanical spring inside a non-latching physical relay just snaps open. The circuit breaks.
The fiber optic connection to the outside world is physically severed.
Literally severed. The machine is completely air-gapped, just instantly bricked, all to protect the sovereignty of the human sitting on the other side of the screen.
It's the ultimate manifestation of hardware over software.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically mechanical guillotine designed to execute any AI that forgets its place.
It's incredible. And today, we are going to reverse engineer exactly who builds a machine like that and, probably more importantly, why.
Because the why is where this gets genuinely fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. So for this deep dive, we have a massive, incredibly complex stack of source material spanning just the last 12 months, from May 2025 to May 2026.
Right. We're looking at the life, the underlying philosophy, and this highly specific tech architecture of a man named James Hood.
Yeah, and he refers to himself as a verified generalist and a senior AI systems architect. And our stack for this is dense. I mean, it is a lot to unpack.
It's a huge multi-threaded collection.
Totally. We're talking personal telemetry logs, comprehensive LinkedIn data dumps, GitHub repos, a self-compiled genomic audit.
Which is wild on its own.
Yeah, that alone is crazy. Plus, we've got a literal tabletop RPG rulebook for Mage, the Ascension, Substack manifests, and deeply technical blueprints for entities called Force Tech and Safe House.
And just to clarify for everyone, Safe House is spelled S-A-I-P-H, but it's pronounced Safe House.
Right, Safe House. And, to understand what he's building there, we have to look at this very specific timeline.
Because this 12-month window we're examining is incredibly volatile. Wow. I mean, it moves from a total devastating systemic crash of his own biological hardware.
Which we'll get into.
Right, all the way to the deployment of what is basically a revolutionary framework for AI governance. He calls the core concept the human OS.
The human operating system. And I want to frame this directly for you listening right now.
Yeah, put it in practical terms.
Think about your own inbox for a second. Think about those bloated dashboards you're required to update. The automated systems that ping you at all hours.
The ones that just never stop.
Never. And think about that overarching corporate expectation that you should function like a cloud server. Just infinitely scalable, always on, completely devoid of personal context.
Right, like you're just a compute resource.
Exactly. So if you have ever felt like modern technology is designed to slowly grind your specific, messy humanity down into a sterile data point.
Which, let's be honest, most of us have.
Absolutely. Or if you feel like your unique way of processing the world is treated by your employer as a bug rather than a feature, the architecture we're about to unpack is going to fundamentally rewire how you view your relationship with machines.
Because the inciting incident for this entire architectural revolution was a catastrophic failure of that exact corporate relationship.
Right. And in the source material, James refers to this event as the bare metal crash of May 2025.
Bare metal. That's a great engineering term for it.
It really is. And looking at his telemetry logs from that period, there's this distinct moment where the language shifts. It goes from someone who's just stressed out to someone recognizing a terminal failure cascade.
He writes that he fell victim to the beige world's extraction model.
The beige world. So what exactly are the mechanics of this extraction model he's talking about?
Well, the beige world is his term for the modern corporate environment, specifically how it handles tech workers.
Right, the cubicles, the HR policy.
Exactly. And the extraction model is an environment that demands infinite efficiency and infinite uptime. but its defining characteristic is that it actively deletes human context from the equation.
It just strips out the humanity entirely.
Yeah. So let's look at his specific situation leading up to May 2025. James was operating as a senior AI systems architect.
Right.
And he was carrying what he documented as the technology load of an entire department. But he was sourced to execute this massive concurrent processing load on a junior dev budget.
Right, which is just classic corporate math. Management looks at the output capabilities of modern software and assumes the human operator can just, endlessly scale their verification speed to match it.
Exactly. But human biology doesn't work like an AWS cluster.
No, you can't just buy more RAM for your brain.
You really can't. You
Yeah.
can't spin up more biological compute power. So when you push a human nervous system to run on a rigid legacy corporate operating system.
And we're talking about an environment characterized by endless synchronous meetings.
Oh, the worst.
Yeah, and 28 field intake forms for basic requests and bloated, unresponsive management dashboards, it creates massive friction.
And James calls this specific friction the efficiency trap.
Let's break down that trap because I feel like it's something almost everyone encounters at work.
Oh, universally.
Right. The efficiency trap is this illusion that just because a machine can process 1 million requests a second, the human should naturally be able to oversee, verify, and validate all of those requests without breaking a sweat.
It treats the human merely as a final, frictionless pass-through for the machine's output.
Exactly. And that is biologically impossible without severe degradation.
Right. The system views the employee not as a sovereign entity with physiological limits, but as an endless resource to be consumed.
Consumed until there's nothing left. So in May 2025, the friction overwhelms his physical capacity. His internal hardware completely redlines. The system just shatters.
Now, in a typical corporate narrative, this is the point where the employee burns out.
Right. They take a medical leave.
Or they quite quit, staying on the payroll while doing the bare minimum.
Yeah, just coasting. But James' logs show a completely different protocol. He doesn't fade out. He trips what he calls his internal dead man switch.
Which is a very deliberate piece of phrasing borrowed from heavy engineering.
Right, like in trains.
Exactly. In a train locomotive or industrial machinery, a dead man switch is a structural failsafe. It requires constant pressure from the operator. So if the operator becomes incapacitated, like if they fall asleep or have a heart attack, their hand drops from the switch and the system automatically engages the brakes.
It halts the machinery before it derails and kills people.
Right. It's a hard stop to prevent a disaster.
So how does he apply that mechanically to his own psychology? Because you can't just install a physical switch on a person.
Well, James's internal cognitive scaffolding, which he actually refers to in his journals as his Council of Intelligence.
I love that term.
It's great. This council recognized that the corporate environment was causing a literal kernel panic in his biology.
A kernel panic. For the non-engineers listening, what is that?
A kernel panic in an operating system is when the core foundational layer of the computer encounters an error from which it cannot safely recover.
Like a total blue screen of death scenario.
Exactly. So it intentionally halts the entire system to prevent data corruption.
It shuts itself down on purpose.
Right. And James was experiencing severe sleep deprivation and biometric red lines. He recognized that this physical degradation was creating a secondary blast radius.
Meaning it was affecting his family.
Exactly. It was threatening the stability of his family.
Yeah.
So the dead man switch tripped. He executed a manual override and brought his own system to a complete halt.
He just hard stopped. He severed his connection to the beige world. But, here's the problem with hard stopping in the modern economy.
A gap.
The gap. It creates the dreaded gap on the resume. If you feed a timeline with a massive employment gap into an applicant tracking system, an ATS.
The algorithm instantly flags you as a liability.
Yes, it's what James calls beige poison. The system just assumes you are defective because you stopped producing.
Which is a fundamental misunderstanding of systems engineering.
How so?
Well, the corporate algorithm flags an erratic timeline or shutdown as a deficit. But from a pure engineering perspective, an intentional shutdown in the face of thermal overload is a required protocol.
It's supposed to happen.
Right. It prevents a catastrophic hardware fire. If a server is running at 105 degrees Celsius because the ambient cooling system in the room failed, shutting the server down is not a bug.
It's a feature.
It is the exact intended behavior. James wasn't failing. He was executing an emergency preservation sequence. He recognized a state of pathological homeostasis.
Pathological homeostasis. I want to dig into that. That's when a biological or systemic entity stays connected to a highly toxic environment simply because the toxicity has become familiar, right?
Yes. It lacks the reflex to disconnect.
It's the devil you know.
Precisely. You stay in the burning building because it's the building you're used to.
Wow. And James broke that homeostasis. He actually stepped outside the burning building.
He did.
But, stepping outside the building doesn't pay the rent. The physical reality of life continues. Food logistics, housing overhead, vehicle maintenance, none of that pauses for a kernel panic.
No, the real world keeps turning.
So to maintain what he calls his survival logistics, he initiates the Ronin protocol. And I have to say, looking at how he implements this, it is entirely counterintuitive for a senior AI architect.
Oh, completely, because he starts driving for DoorDash.
DoorDash. On the surface, it looks like a massive regression, like he's just given up.
But when you look at the telemetry logs of his dash runs, you realize he isn't just driving to make a quick buck.
No, he's doing something way more complex.
He is treating the entire gig economy experience as a high-stress beta test for environment optimization.
This is where we really need to talk about his specific use of AI, because he is running deliveries, but he is running Gemini Google's AI model simultaneously.
And he's not using it to generate text or chat. He's not asking it to write emails.
Right. He is using it as a high bitrate spatial processor. What does that actually look like in the cab of his truck?
So he is feeding the AI a continuous stream of highly localized physical telemetry.
Like what kind of data?
Route times, a physical suspension feedback from his truck as he hits potholes.
Wait, he's feeding it pothole feedback?
Yes, along with his own resting heart rate, local weather patterns, traffic density. He notes in his logs that he doesn't understand the physical mechanics of his truck's engine perfectly.
Okay, so he's not a mechanic.
Right. But he deeply understands how disparate systems interact with one another. So when the truck makes a sound or a vibration, he feeds the physical symptoms into the AI to trace the mechanical fault lines.
That is wild. It's like he took his own internal processor out of a suffocating climate-controlled corporate data center.
And just carried it outside.
Yeah, and plugged it directly into the chaotic, sparking power grid of the street just to see if it could regulate its own temperature.
He is forcing the AI to build a topographical map of his immediate survival reality.
Which is so different from how AI is normally used.
What is mechanically vital here is how he reclaims the technology from the corporate sphere. In the beige world, AI is used to abstract reality.
Right, to turn human effort into a clean, flat chart for management.
Exactly. But out on the street, James is using the AI to anchor into physical reality. He's grounding the machine in the dirt, the traffic, the exhaust fumes.
Forcing it to bind to his specific, localized context rather than just floating off into statistical averages.
Right. He is beta testing the exact unyielding boundaries that will eventually become his safehood architecture.
But wait, I have to ask, how does someone even survive that kind of baseline chaos, let alone weaponize it into a new systems architecture?
That's the core question, isn't it?
It is, because to understand how he can build a system that expects and manages this level of failure, we have to look at an upbringing where failure was the default state.
We have to decompile his roots.
We do. And looking through this stack, a lot of this requires looking at biology through the lens of pure hardware.
The source material demands a forensic system audit of his origins. We are tracing back to what he documents as the Genesis node.
The Genesis node. Okay, December 17th, 1978, Cushing, Oklahoma.
He maps his ancestral registry in the provided documents back to the Scottish clan MacFarlane.
And they have a very definitive motto, don't they?
They do. This I'll defend.
This I'll defend. He also details connections to the Cushing oil boom and the notoriously violent Brooks-McFarlane feud of the 1890s.
So he establishes this deep, generational baseline of conflict, territorial defense, and survival.
Right. But the true compilation of his hardware, the actual physical wiring of his nervous system, happened before he was even born. Let's unpack the concept of exposure engineering.
This is a critical piece of the diagnostic puzzle, and it completely shifts the standard paradigm of neurodivergence.
How so?
According to his records, James's mother, Helen, served as a Women's Army Corps medical lab tech.
Specifically, a WAC 92B20, right?
Yes, at Fort McClellan in 1971. And during her training, she was operating in a chemical foundry that was heavily saturated with Agent Orange precursors.
And polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs.
Exactly. So she is essentially learning complex medical procedures inside a toxic cloud for 14 weeks.
That is horrific.
It is. And James argues in his manifest that this severe toxic exposure caused an epigenetic override.
Meaning the environment literally changed the DNA expression.
Right. He believes the saturated environment literally altered the source code of the next generation.
And he doesn't just theorize this. He backs this assertion with a literal genomic audit.
He mapped his own DNA and confirmed he possesses the RS4680GG genotype.
Which is a very specific genetic variance, right? Colloquially known in genetics literature as the warrior genotype.
Exactly. It involves the COMT gene, which is responsible for coding the enzyme that breaks down neurotransmitters like dopamine in the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, so what does that actually mean for his brain?
Because of the physical structure resulting from this specific GG variance, his brain clears dopamine at roughly 4 times the speed of a standard baseline human.
Wait, let me stop you there because we really need to translate this into everyday reality.
Let's do it.
If you walk into a standard clinical environment today, like a psychiatrist's office or a school counselor's office with a brain that clears dopamine that fast, they don't call it the warrior genotype.
No, they absolutely do not.
They slap a label on you. They call it attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
ADHD.
They classify it as a deficit, a broken mechanism. But James looks at this RS4680GG genotype and explicitly calls it high-torque warrior explorer firmware.
It's a completely different framing.
It is, and I have to push back on this a little bit. Is he essentially treating a multi-generational chemical exposure to Agent Orange precursors, something that caused severe health issues and trauma, as an upgrade?
It is absolutely crucial not to misunderstand his terminology here. He is not romanticizing the trauma.
Okay.
He is not saying the exposure was a positive event. He is rigorously, almost coldly, acknowledging the hardware modifications that resulted from it.
Right, he's just looking at the specs.
Exactly. When you look at this through the lens of systems engineering, you have to work with the hardware you physically possess, not the hardware the instruction manual says you should possess.
That makes sense. The clinical medical establishment pathologizes this fast dopamine clearance because it doesn't fit the needs of the beige world.
Exactly. If you are sitting in a sterile corporate cubicle doing deeply repetitive administrative tasks,
A brain that clears dopamine 4 times faster than average is going to starve to death.
it really is. It is going to rapidly seek stimulation. It is going to lose focus on the mundane because the mundane provides absolutely no chemical reward.
So it looks like a systemic failure.
It looks like a software bug to the corporation. But James argues that it is a hardware feature designed specifically for extreme survival.
Right. The code he writes is an unyielding extension of the life he actually survived. He was compiled in a toxic, chaotic environment.
Therefore, his nervous system is hard-coded to thrive in high-latency, multi-vector environments where standard baseline systems would freeze.
He refers to this state as sensory amplification syndrome.
Right, yes. In a crisis scenario, when the rest of the standard grid goes dark and panic sets in, his esoteric bitrate activates.
So the clinical world sees a frustrating friction, but James sees a high-clearance Vanguard engine built to navigate the swamp.
Built to navigate the swamp. That's the perfect way to put it.
And looking at his actual childhood, swamp is honestly a massive understatement.
It really is. He calls his upbringing the analog wasteland.
We are talking about a highly feral Gen X childhood sequence here. The logs detail time in foster care at Hiddle House.
He also mentions stays in a runaway shelter.
Yeah, and time spent in a mental institute in Pensacola called the Lakeview Center. He also endured the deeply tragic premature loss of twin siblings.
And educationally, the system failed him too.
Completely. By the 11th grade, he dropped out of Holmes County High School entirely because his hard-earned credits were arbitrarily invalidated by the administration.
Just wiped out.
It is a relentless sequence of institutional failures. Every system that was supposed to provide a baseline of protection for a child constantly and spectacularly crashed.
And yet, amidst this feral survival, he is actively learning how to interface with the technology of the era.
Right. He documents learning basic and quick basic programming as early as 1993.
But the absolute foundational influence on his system's philosophy was his mother.
Helen.
Yes, she transitioned from being an army nurse to an electronics technician in the 1990s.
Oh, this part is amazing. I was reading through the transcripts we have of his videos, and he talks about his mother fixing 1980s electronics.
James spent his childhood watching her perform literal physical surgery on analog circuit boards.
He absorbed this deep-seated belief from her that systems are repairable, not replaceable.
And think about the timing of this. She was carefully tracing power flows and resoldering connections right at the exact historical moment the tech industry was deciding that consumer hardware was cheap enough to just throw away and replace.
Right, the dawn of planned obsolescence. But he learned that if a system is broken, you don't throw it out in a landfill.
You use a multimeter to trace the flow of power.
You find the degraded solder joint, and you fix it with physical integrity so it never breaks that exact way again.
That is the physical seed of his entire architectural philosophy.
It really grounds everything he does later.
To James, information is not an abstract concept floating in a cloud. Information is physical. It requires voltage. It requires pathways.
He doesn't just write abstract code, he solders logic.
Exactly. And we also see the genesis of his obsession with human factors engineering through their shared experience with early video games.
Yeah, the Atari 2600, the Super Nintendo. He talks about sitting on the floor playing Pong, Super Mario World, and Street Fighter II Turbo with his mom.
Which is such a classic Gen X memory.
Totally. And she would watch him navigate these digital worlds, cheer him on, and teach him analog life lessons.
Like yelling, "Don't get cocky," right before he missed a jump and fell into a pit in a game.
Which is great advice, honestly. But what really strikes me is that he was acting as a physical translator for her. He had to explain the mechanics of the digital interface to a woman whose entire technical background was rooted in physical analog machines.
Ah, right. Translating the digital to the analog.
And that translation process forced him to realize early on that the digital interface must implicitly match the user's physical expectations.
Because if it doesn't, the user fails.
Exactly. If a button on a screen is supposed to initiate a play sequence, it shouldn't be hidden behind a nested drop-down menu with a vague, minimalist icon.
It should look, feel, and act exactly like a physical, mechanical play button on a tape deck.
Yes. This realization is the bedrock of what we now call user accessibility. You don't subvert the user's expectations just to prove how clever your design is.
You build the digital environment to physically support the human's natural intuition.
So, armed with this heavily modified, hyper-threaded biology and this deep-seated, almost militant belief that systems must serve and repair the human,
James enters the workforce.
He does. But the corporate world he walks into wasn't built for feral hardware.
Not at all. It was built for compliant cogs.
Which brings us into the era of the enterprise grid. From 2012 to 2021, James migrates his operations from the analog wasteland into high-stakes, 99.99% uptime digital corporate environments.
He actually defines this entire period as his era of crisis architecture.
Before we dig into the specific frameworks he was building, I noticed a recurring entity in his logs starting around 2010. He refers to the Guild of Two.
Ah, yes. He synchronizes his life with his wife, Hood.
He uses terms like his shield maiden or his hedge witch. In his deeply personal telemetry, he describes their relationship mechanically as a braided cognition.
Braided cognition. That's a beautiful way to describe a partnership.
It is. He says it's necessary to manage environmental stability. It's a true, grounded partnership that acts as a physical anchor for his extremely high-velocity mental processing.
And if you look at the environments he was about to enter, that stabilization was an absolute prerequisite for survival.
Let's examine his deployment at Raymond James Financial, spanning roughly 2016 to 2017. He's brought in as a lead web developer.
And his primary task is the massive concurrent migration of over 2,200 individual financial advisor websites to a Sitecore 8 architecture.
Let's pause and consider the scale of that. 2,200 individual financial websites.
It's a staggering technology load.
And each one likely has its own custom quirks, legacy data structures, and highly anxious financial advisors terrified of downtime.
Especially because he has to execute this during the immense systemic pressure of the Deutsche Bank and Alex Brown acquisition.
Right. A standard baseline developer would just drown in that kind of synchronous processing overhead. The sheer volume of concurrent variables would cause a mental stack overflow.
But you have to remember his RS-4680 GG hardware.
The warrior genotype.
Exactly. In a quiet cubicle doing one mundane task at a time, that hardware starves and degrades.
But if you feed it 2,200 failing legacy sites in the middle of a chaotic corporate acquisition...
That is the exact crisis environment his biology was chemically overclocked to handle.
He refers to his state during this time as unstoppable throughput.
He operates not as a standard linear programmer, but as a high bitrate spatial processor.
He can rapidly ingest and adopt massive complex text stacks over single turns of the clock because his brain natively processes the variables in parallel.
And from that corporate crucible, he shifts deeper into what he calls the gray space.
VATC and Athenic Special Missions from 2017 to 2021. He operates as a lead architect for modernization.
And his mandate here is to ruthlessly tear down broken legacy code. He specifically mentions ripping out old AngularJS architectures and build a platform called Epic Ready.
He is architecting zero-trust military simulations for special operations forces. And this is the moment in our stack where one of the most surprising and frankly brilliant sources comes into play.
The tabletop RPG rulebook.
Yes, the Mage. The Ascension document. It seems totally incongruous at first glance. Like, why is a D&D style rulebook in a stack of enterprise architecture documents?
But it is a masterclass in how hobbies can collide with high-stakes engineering.
James took the narrative mechanics and topological structures of tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons and Mage and applied them directly to the architecture of military simulations.
We really need to dissect the mechanics of this because it is fascinating.
Let's do it. So the specific document we have is a campaign setting based in Washington, D.C. You have these player characters, mages, from different esoteric traditions fighting against a highly structured antagonist group called LRP.
Which stands for Localized Area Reinforcement Peacekeepers.
Right. And these LRP soldiers have physical uniforms that grant them stealth dice in the game mechanics.
They have helmets that hardwire into their nervous systems and video feeds that upload to a centralized dispatch van using bound spirits.
It is an incredibly detailed, systematic simulation of asymmetrical conflict. The game mechanics track paradox points, spheres of magic, and environmental variables with extreme precision.
But if you strip away the fantasy terminology, if you remove the words mages and spirits, what you are looking at mechanically is a highly advanced multivariable zero-trust environment simulator.
Exactly. Let's think about how a tabletop RPG actually works. When you are the dungeon master running a game, you are not writing a rigid, linear script for the players to follow.
Because if you do, the game breaks. Players never do what you expect them to do.
Right, they always go off the rails. So instead, you are managing a highly chaotic party of unpredictable human actors within a strict, rule-bound physics engine.
You have to architect a system where their specific, unpredictable chaos naturally collides with the physics of the world to generate an outcome.
Yes. He explicitly writes in his logs, if you force them onto a linear path, the game crashes. Let's map this to a real-world special operations scenario.
Okay, you have a soldier in the field trying to call in a medevac while local comms are jammed and the weather is degrading.
Right. How does a software simulation account for human panic? How does it account for an unpredictable, chaotic variable?
James realized that a senior systems architect isn't just a coder staring at API endpoints. The architect is the dungeon master.
They are orchestrating the underlying logic layer, so the system actually compiles and functions when you violently mash all these erratic, stressed human components together.
It is a profound synthesis of diverse skills. He is treating human unpredictability not as an error to be coded out, but as a core variable that the physics engine must gracefully accommodate.
And this philosophy evolved even further when he moved to Dynamis, building platforms like CBRN Responder for first responders and FEMA.
In this environment, the concept of human factors stopped being just a preference for a clean user interface and became literal life-or-death architectural physics.
He refers to this as his cockpit philosophy. He notes this was derived straight from a college human factors class he took with Dr. Jim Bliss.
And what's the foundational rule of that philosophy?
The button goes exactly where the pilot's instinct expects it to go under high G stress.
Exactly. When James is building cloud-based emergency management platforms, things like user accessibility, Section 508, and AD compliance are not treated as a legal checklist.
Right. They're not an afterthought slapped onto the end of a sprint to avoid a corporate lawsuit.
They are the core physics of the system. Let's look at the mechanics of web accessibility for a second.
Okay, let's break it down.
If James builds a form field with a lazy or improper ARIA label, which is the hidden text that tells a screen reader what a button does,
And a visually impaired first responder using that screen reader fails to receive the warning data.
the system has fundamentally failed. People could literally die.
Or if the keyboard navigation is broken because a developer accidentally coded a focus trap.
Where a user tadding through a site gets stuck on one element and cannot navigate away.
Right. If that happens, a soldier with limited physical mobility is entirely locked out of their critical training data.
It's a physical barrier disguised as a digital one.
Looking at this timeline, I'm just struck by the connective tissue of this 27-year sequence.
It all builds on itself.
It really does. You have a kid surviving the analog wasteland, learning to physically fix broken VCRs, playing Super Nintendo, navigating the extreme volatility of the foster care system.
Running complex tabletop RPGs for his friends.
Yeah, and he takes all of those specific, distinct survival mechanics and compiles them into a unified theory of systems architecture to protect military operators and emergency personnel.
It's like his entire career is this massive open-world RPG, and he is constantly, dynamically respecting his character's skill tree to defeat the next boss.
Whether that boss is a 2,200-site database migration, tangled legacy PHP code, or a physically inaccessible user interface.
And that incredible ability to adopt entire tech stacks and refactor mental models in a single clock cycle is the direct, undeniable result of his feral roots.
He treats broken legacy code the same way a detective treats a crime scene.
And he approaches new programming frameworks like a physical sparring match. His biological hardware is optimized for crisis, not complacency.
He has spent decades performing forensic system audits on human-to-system protocols.
But as the timeline approaches 2025, the fundamental nature of the system he is auditing radically, violently changes.
Because the crisis of tangled legacy code is absolutely nothing compared to the crisis introduced by modern generative AI.
Which brings us full circle to the crash of May 2025 and the birth of what he calls the 2026 sovereign architecture.
Because by 2025, AI was no longer just a neat tool for generating boilerplate code.
It was being deployed as a corporate weapon.
Yes. The beige world saw AI as the ultimate extraction mechanism, a way to achieve infinite efficiency and scale without having to pay humans for their context, their experience, or their intuition.
AI was threatening to automate away the very human verification process that James has spent his entire life protecting.
This demanded a completely new architecture. It demanded a fortress.
And that fortress is SafeHood version 2.0, the community operating system.
SafeHood. And this is an acronym, right? Standing for Sovereign Architecture for Epistemic Human Operating Override Defense.
It is the culmination of his life's work. It is a rigid, zero-trust perimeter specifically designed to protect the human OS from the efficiency trap.
We really need to break down these specific terms because this is the absolute meat of his philosophy.
Let's revisit the efficiency trap. This is the corporate desire to remove human verification from the loop entirely to save capital.
Right. It's treating AI as a magical oracle that can fully replace human labor and intuition.
And James fundamentally, aggressively rejects this premise.
He argues that we don't need tools that do more things faster. We need tools that respect the physical limitations of the human OS.
The foundational premise of SafeHood is that an artificial intelligence is not a sentient colleague. It is not an oracle.
What is it then?
It is a stateless third-party API. It is basic database infrastructure.
And because it is stateless, meaning it holds no inherent memory or context of its own between interactions, it calculates the mathematical, statistical average of a problem and applies it blindly. But here is the danger. If you are a vulnerable node, if you are a trauma survivor, or if you are operating in a highly volatile edge case environment.
A statistical average isn't just unhelpful. It is actively, physically dangerous.
It causes a secondary blast radius that damages the user.
This is where James declares total war on the concept of prompt engineering.
Oh, he hates that term.
He refers to prompt engineering as a sociopathic corporate buzzword. He argues that it completely misunderstands the physical layer of machine learning.
You don't just type a clever, polite sentence into a chat box and hope the machine hallucinates the right answer.
Instead, he introduces the Isaac protocol and the concept of context architecture.
The Isaac protocol dictates a very strict law. Care equals the preservation of verified historical context.
You cannot ask a stateless machine to care about your well-being.
It physically cannot. You have to force it to operate within your boundaries. Context architecture means that before the AI is allowed to execute a single line of code, before it is allowed to generate a single response, you must forcefully inject a rigid data structure directly into its active memory buffer.
He calls this file the Humanos manifest.json.
Think of the Humanos manifest as a digital allergy bracelet.
That's a great analogy.
If you go to a hospital, before a doctor gives you any medication, they have to physically check your allergy bracelet to ensure the standard treatment doesn't accidentally kill you.
James is forcing the AI to read his biological allergy bracelet before it operates.
You force the machine to ingest your physical limits, your localized environment, your origin traumas, and your unyielding boundaries.
You build a concrete wall behind the digital mirror.
You anchor the AI to the dirt of your actual physical reality before it can float off into the stratosphere of statistical averages.
You forcefully demote the AI from oracle to junior partner.
The human is always the sovereign lead. Always.
And he doesn't just leave this as software philosophy. Software can be bypassed.
Right. Anyone can rewrite code.
So James anchors this philosophy in physical reality with the Osgood-Rupert box. This is the physical hardware layer of safehood.
In his blueprints, he describes it as a 1U rack-mount infrastructure utilizing non-latching physical relays to enforce a strict error gap the moment system integrity is threatened.
Let's explain the mechanics of a non-latching relay, because it is brilliantly simple.
A standard latching relay is like a light switch, right? You flip it on, and it stays on until someone physically flips it off.
But a non-latching relay requires a constant active voltage, a heartbeat, just to keep the circuit closed.
So if the AI hallucinates, or if it ignores the parameters of the humanos manifest.json, the heartbeat script terminates.
The voltage drops.
The mechanical spring inside the relay violently pulls the contacts apart.
The fiber optic signal goes dark. It physically severs the connection.
He is literally building a machine that will take wire cutters to its own internet connection if the AI stops listening to the human. That is an intensely physical, aggressive posture for a software developer.
But that is exactly what systemic engineering means in this context. He is using data diodes and write once-read many media to create a forensic diagnostic record that is physically impossible to overwrite.
Because the code he writes is an unyielding extension of the life he survived.
He watched systems fail his whole life. Foster care institutions, medical bureaucracies, corporate HR departments.
He knows that software promises, user agreements, and terms of service are completely hollow.
Only bare metal and physical limits can truly protect the human OS. The verification tail cannot be clipped for corporate profit.
And yet, within this rigid, air-gapped fortress, there is a surprising amount of soul and humanity.
There really is. He bakes in concepts like jinba itai.
It's a Japanese phrase meaning unity of horse and rider. He relates this back to a memory of riding a horse as a kid at the Florida Sheriff's Youth Camp.
He realized his job wasn't to force the horse forward with physical strength, but to synchronize with its heartbeat and rhythm.
The horse instinctively knew the way home. He applies this directly to AI architecture. You synchronize with the machine, you maintain a shared rhythm, so you both make it home safely.
And perhaps the most telling and deeply human system requirement of safehood is a protocol he calls furry node stewardship.
Yes. This involves his rescued tuxedo cat, Rita.
He mandates that pet wellness is a core system requirement of the architecture, not an optional HR perk.
He notes in his telemetry logs that Rita developed a life-threatening infection requiring immediate surgery.
Now, a stateless AI, programmed for pure corporate extraction and efficiency, would view time off to care for a cat as a loss of productivity.
Safehood explicitly rejects that calculation. The system enforces what he calls the Disney Princess Protocol, recognizing the pilot's physical and emotional reality and demanding sector isolation to protect the vulnerable node.
Taking care of the cat is not a distraction from the work. It is the work. It is the preservation of the human OS.
So, having built this incredible personal armor, this zero-trust environment to ensure his own survival, James realizes that the invisible crush of the beige world is coming for everyone else.
AI automation is accelerating rapidly.
He needed to scale this protective philosophy to shield others in the enterprise space. And that brings us to the final evolution in our timeline, 2026, the deployment of Force Tech and SafeHouse.
In 2026, James takes on the role of principal AI systems architect at ForceTech, and he brings his entire hardened arsenal with him.
He implements a diagnostic framework he calls the macro-meso-micro lattice, which is used to safely route and verify data across the organization.
And he names the specific nodes of this lattice after his colleagues.
The macro level is high-level system stability mapping. He calls it the Christine node.
The meso level is asynchronous load balancing, the Kento node.
And the micro level is the physical grounding and zero-trust hardware verification, the Nelson node.
He is orchestrating massive, full-stack technical debt refactoring across C#, TypeScript, and React. But he isn't just changing the code. He's fundamentally changing how the company interacts with AI.
He collaborates heavily with Christine O'Neill and Jeffrey Hughes. With Christine, they bonded over their shared neurodivergence, specifically autism.
But they don't treat it as a deficit. They recognize it as a massive strategic advantage in auditing and dismantling broken corporate systems.
Together, they developed the Logic Sieve protocol.
He also refers to this as the CSS reset intake.
If you know web development, a CSS reset is a piece of code that strips away all the default, built-in styling of a web browser so the developer can start from a true, clean, predictable, blank slate.
James applies this concept to corporate governance. Before Force Tech will even begin an AI audit or integration for a corporate client, they force the client to physically pass the Logic Sieve.
The client must provide physical, version-controlled compliance standards. Why? Because James refuses to let AI audit broken legacy word drift.
Exactly. If a corporation's internal logic is just a contradictory mess of buzzwords like synergy, agile, vibe, the AI will just confidently automate and accelerate that exact mess.
They will just scale the dysfunction.
The Logic Sieve strips away the buzzwords and forces the company to define what a success state physically looks like before the AI touches a single byte of data.
He demands epistemic ground truth before a single line of code is written.
It's the ultimate enforcement of verification over speed.
And the ultimate physical manifestation of this entire ecosystem is Safehouse.
Safehouse, named after the star in the constellation Orion. It is designed as a community and innovation ecosystem to connect technologists, founders, and capital.
But it is emphatically not a standard Silicon Valley tech incubator.
No, it is a fortress built specifically to reject the Big Four offshore factory model.
As massive consulting firms pivot toward building automated, junior-heavy back-office factories designed to just blindly churn out AI-generated boilerplate code, Safehouse goes in the exact opposite direction.
It operates on the pillars of talent development, research, and venture incubation, all rigorously grounded in providing high-integrity context.
James argues that the future of technological value is not in who can generate the most text or code the fastest.
AI has already commoditized speed. The true value is now in the bedrock layer.
The value is in verification. Safehouse is built entirely around the concept of the sovereign lead.
The human provides the architecture, the deep historical context, the feral survival logic, and the final verification.
The AI is strictly a junior partner used only for high-by-trade execution. They completely reject the fragility of what the modern tech industry is calling vibe coding.
You cannot simply vibe a military simulation. You cannot vibe an emergency responder network.
You must architect it with physical precision. Safehouse and Force Tech are the ultimate manifestations of his feral boot sequence. Think about what he has achieved here.
He has built entirely new environments specifically designed to protect the weirdlings, the event-driven pilots with high-torque hardware, the neurodivergent thinkers, the feral problem solvers.
He has built an ecosystem that actively prevents them from being crushed by the beige corporate machine.
He took the analog wasteland of his youth, the toxic exposure of his genetics, the crisis management of his military contracts, and he forged an armor that can shield an entire community.
I think when you look at the entirety of this timeline, the transition from the bare metal crash to the deployment of this architecture, a very clear synthesis emerges.
I completely agree.
When you step back and view the system as a whole, what does it tell us?
Ultimately, what this entire deep dive proves is this. A gap on a resume isn't a liability. It is exactly where the armor is forged. The reckoning is green, and the human must always remain the lead. In omnia paratus.
In omnia paratus. Prepared for all things. And that leaves us with a question for you, the listener. Think about the systems you interact with every single day. The dashboards, the algorithms, the corporate expectations that treat your specific biology as an inconvenience to be managed. If you had to write your own Humanos manifest.json tonight, a list of your absolute unyielding biological and mental boundaries that no machine or corporation is allowed to cross, what is the very first rule you would write to protect your own sovereignty?